The crystalline doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a sound like breaking ice. Ambassador Daniel Cross stepped through, and for the first moment in his 40-year career, he understood what it meant to be truly alone. The chamber stretched before him like the inside of a massive geode, walls curving upward into darkness, every surface gleaming with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythms no human had ever seen. Tiered platforms rose in concentric circles, each one occupied by beings that defied description. Some floated in containment fields filled with toxic gases. Others stood on appendages that seemed to bend in impossible directions. A few existed as pure energy, their forms shifting and reforming as they observed the human who had dared to request an audience. Daniel walked toward the center of the chamber, his boots clicking against the polished stone floor. Each step echoed in the vast space, a reminder that he was one man standing before the representatives of 947 separate civilizations. Behind him, the doors sealed shut with a finality that made his throat tighten. No guards had accompanied him. No staff waited in the wings. The council had made their terms clear. One human would speak for Earth, one chance to avoid what they called inevitable consequences. Hi. Arbiter Kelm descended from the uppermost platform, his form shifting from solid to liquid and back again as he moved through the various atmospheric zones. When he finally settled on a platform 20 meters above Daniel, his voice emerged from translation devices embedded in the walls. The sound was cold, clinical, completely devoid of emotion. Human, you stand before the Galactic Council. Identify yourself and state your world of origin. Daniel looked up at the being of pure energy, refusing to let his fear show. Ambassador Daniel Cross of Earth, third planet orbiting a G-type star in what you designate as Sector 779. We received your summons 3 weeks ago. I'm here to discuss the charges brought against my species. A ripple of movement passed through the assembled delegates. Daniel caught fragments of alien communication. Sounds that ranged from subsonic rumbles to frequencies that made his teeth ache. The translation devices struggled to keep up, rendering the chaos into overlapping whispers that filled the chamber like wind through dead trees. Charges, Kelm repeated, his form pulsing with what might have been amusement or contempt. An interesting choice of words. The Galactic Council does not bring charges, Ambassador Cross. We make observations. We assess threats. We protect the stability of civilized space. Your species has been observed. You have been assessed. The question before this council is whether you represent a threat that must be contained. Daniel felt sweat beginning to form on his palms. He had prepared for this moment, spent 3 weeks studying every scrap of information humanity had gathered about galactic politics. The briefings had been clear. The Council controlled 74% of known inhabited space. They maintained the largest military force in the galaxy. They had existed for 18,000 years, outlasting empires and witnessing the birth and death of countless civilizations. They were not beings to be challenged or defied. They were the closest thing the galaxy had to absolute authority, but the briefings had also revealed something else. Something that gave Daniel the thinnest thread of hope. The Council had not survived 18,000 years through military might alone. They had survived through negotiation, through careful balance, through the ability to adapt their rules when confronted with circumstances that threatened their stability. They were bureaucrats first and warriors second. That meant they could be reasoned with if you knew how to frame the argument. Then I request permission to address this council's observations, Daniel said, keeping his voice steady. I believe there may be misunderstandings about humanity that, if clarified, would demonstrate we pose no threat to galactic stability. Another ripple of movement. Several delegates leaned forward, their various sensory organs focusing on the lone human. High Arbiter Kelm's form flickered, then solidified into something almost humanoid. It was a gesture of attention, Daniel realized. The council was actually listening. Proceed, Kelm said. Daniel took a breath, ordering his thoughts. Everything depended on the next few minutes. The council's primary concern, according to the documents we received, is that humanity has developed faster than light travel despite originating from what you classify as a Category 10 hazard. World, you believe this represents an anomaly that threatens the established order of galactic civilization. It is not merely an anomaly, a new voice said. Daniel turned to see a massive insectoid being, its carapace covered in glowing symbols. It is an impossibility. Category 10 worlds do not produce spacefaring species. They produce extinction events. Your world experiences regular planetary disasters, volcanic supereruptions, ice ages, asteroid impacts, disease pandemics. Your own star's radiation should have sterilized your planet's surface millennia ago, yet somehow you survived. More than survived. You thrived. You built civilizations. You developed technology. You reached the stars. Explain this impossibility, human. Daniel recognized the trap immediately. If he claimed humanity was special or superior, the Council would see it as arrogance deserving punishment. If he admitted they were lucky, the Council would dismiss them as unworthy of consideration. He needed a third option, something that reframed the entire conversation. We survived because we learned to adapt, Daniel said carefully. Earth doesn't produce easy survival. Every generation of humanity has faced challenges that required innovation. We learned to cooperate because isolated groups died. We learned to plan for the future because short-term thinking led to starvation. We learned to question our assumptions because rigid beliefs got us killed. Our world taught us to be flexible, resilient, and creative. Those same traits let us develop space travel faster than species from more stable worlds. Those traits also make you dangerous, Kelm said. The Council has records of your planet's history. You have been at war with yourselves for your entire recorded existence. You have developed weapons capable of destroying your own biosphere. You have committed acts of violence on scales that would cause most civilized species to collapse from psychological trauma. How can the Council trust that such a species will not bring that same violence to the larger galaxy? This was the real question, Daniel knew. Everything else had been preamble. The Council had seen humanity's history and drawn the obvious conclusion. Humans were killers, and killers could not be allowed to spread through civilized space unchecked. He needed to give them a reason to reconsider that conclusion without lying about what humanity was capable of. Because we're already here, Daniel said quietly. High Arbiter, humanity has had faster-than-light capability for 7 years. In that time, we've encountered 43 separate civilizations. We've established peaceful contact with 29 of them. We've traded with 18. We've signed mutual defense agreements with 3. We have not fired a single shot in aggression against any galactic species. We have not claimed territory that belonged to others. We have not threatened or intimidated or coerced. We have done exactly what we're doing now. We've talked. We've negotiated. We've tried to understand the rules and follow them. 7 years is insufficient data, the insectoid delegate said. Your species is young, aggressive, unpredictable. History shows that such species either destroy themselves or become threats to others. The Council cannot risk the latter possibility. Then what are you proposing? Daniel asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it spoken aloud. High Arbiter Kelm's form expanded, filling the space above Daniel with shifting patterns of light. The Galactic Council proposes quarantine. Your species will be confined to your home system. A barrier field will be established at the edge of your star's gravitational influence. No human vessel will be permitted to cross that barrier. No non-human vessel will enter your system. You will exist in isolation until such time as the Council determines you have evolved beyond your violent nature. This is the standard procedure for Category 10 species that achieve space travel prematurely. Daniel felt the words hit him like physical blows. Quarantine, isolation, imprisonment, everything humanity had dreamed of. Every hope of joining the galactic community erased with a single administrative decision. 8 billion people locked away, because aliens from safer worlds couldn't understand what it took to survive on Earth. But beneath the shock, Beneath the horror, Daniel felt something else stirring. Anger. Cold. Calculating anger that sharpened his mind instead of clouding it. The council thought they could cage humanity. They thought they could make this decision and humanity would simply accept it. They were about to learn otherwise. How long? Daniel asked. How long would this quarantine last? Until the council determines your species is no longer a threat. Typically between 5 and 10,000 years. 10,000 years. Long enough for human civilization to collapse and rebuild a dozen times over. Long enough to forget the stars and everything they had promised? Long enough to turn Earth into the very prison the Council feared humanity escaping from. Daniel looked up at High Arbiter Kelm, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of the diplomatic caution he had shown before. No. The chamber fell silent. Even the translation devices seemed to pause, as if uncertain they had processed the word correctly. No? Kelm repeated. No, Daniel said again. Humanity rejects your authority to quarantine us. We have committed no crimes. We have violated no laws. You cannot imprison an entire species because you're afraid of what we might do. That's not justice. That's tyranny. You dare to defy the Galactic Council? The insectoid delegate rose, its carapace glowing brighter. We represent 947 civilizations. We control fleets that could sterilize your entire system. You are one primitive species from a death world who has barely learned to leave your own planet. You have no power here. Daniel smiled then, a thin expression that held no warmth. Then why are you so afraid of us? The silence that followed Daniel's question stretched across the council chamber like a physical thing. High Arbiter Kelm's energy form flickered rapidly, shifting through colors that the translation devices couldn't interpret. Around the circular tiers, 947 representatives of civilized space watched the lone human, who had just committed what most considered diplomatic suicide. No species challenged the council openly. Not in this chamber. Not before the assembled authority of 18,000 years of galactic governance, but Daniel Cross wasn't backing down. He had played the diplomatic game for the first half of the meeting, following every protocol, respecting every tradition. Now he was done playing. If the council wanted to treat humanity as a threat, then he would show them exactly what that threat looked like when it refused to cooperate. I'll ask again, Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. Why are you so afraid of us? We have 11 ships capable of interstellar travel. You have fleets numbering in the tens of thousands. We control one solar system. You control most of the galaxy. We've been in space for 7 years. You've been traveling the stars since before human civilization existed. By every metric that matters, we should be irrelevant to you. Yet you called this emergency session. You summoned me here. You're discussing quarantine protocols for a species that couldn't threaten you if we tried. Why? The insectoid delegate who had spoken earlier descended from its platform, moving with surprising grace for something so large. Daniel had learned its name during the briefings. Council Speaker Threll of the Vex Collective, one of the oldest and most influential members of the galactic community. When Threll spoke, entire sectors listened. You ask why we fear you? Look at your own history, human. Your species has existed as a unified civilization for less than 300 years. In that time, you have engaged in 2 global conflicts that killed hundreds of millions. You have developed and deployed weapons of mass destruction. You have poisoned your own atmosphere, destroyed vast portions of your biosphere, and driven countless species to extinction. Your entertainment media glorifies violence. Your economic systems reward aggression. Your social structures are built on competition and dominance. You are, by every measure we possess, a predator species that has never learned to coexist peacefully. Daniel nodded slowly. Everything you just said is true. Humanity has done terrible things. We've fought wars. We've built weapons. We've damaged our world. But you're only looking at half the picture, Council Speaker. You see the violence, but not the context. You see the weapons, but not why we built them. Context does not matter, Threll said flatly. Violence is violence. Destruction is destruction. The Council cannot risk allowing such a species to spread through civilized space. Context is the only thing that matters, Daniel countered. Earth isn't like your worlds, Council Speaker. I've read the xenobiology reports. I know what a Category 10 hazard world means. It means that everything about our planet tried to kill us. The climate, the predators, the diseases, even the ground beneath our feet wasn't stable. Earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis. Our own planet was trying to shake us off. Like parasites, he began to pace, moving in a slow circle so he could address different sections of the assembled delegates. Humanity didn't develop violence because we're evil or broken. We developed it because peaceful species went extinct on Earth. Cooperation wasn't a choice. It was survival. Every human alive today is descended from ancestors who learned to work together, to plan ahead, to adapt faster than the threats that wanted to kill them. Yes, we fight each other, but we also saved each other. Every disaster that should have ended us made us stronger instead. This is merely rationalization, a new voice said. Daniel turned to see a floating crystalline being, its surface reflecting light in geometric patterns. You describe yourself as survivors, but the Council sees conquerors. You claim your violence was necessary for survival, but now you seek to expand beyond your world. What necessity drives you now? Why must humanity spread to the stars when you already possess a planet? Daniel had been waiting for this question. It was the heart of everything. The fundamental disconnect between how humans saw themselves and how the Council perceived them. Because staying on one planet means eventual extinction. We've seen it happen on Earth dozens of times. Species that couldn't adapt to changing conditions died out. We learned that lesson over millions of years of evolution. Expansion isn't aggression for humanity. It's insurance against annihilation. Then you admit your species is driven by fear, High Arbiter Kelm said. Fear is a destabilizing force. The Council has spent millennia removing fear from civilized space. We have created a galaxy where species can trust their neighbors, where conflict is resolved through dialogue rather than violence, where the future is predictable and stable. Your fear-driven expansion threatens that stability. Your stability is stagnation, Daniel said, and now he let some of his frustration show. I've seen the demographic reports. Council species have declining birth rates. Your frontier colonies are being abandoned. Your technological innovation has plateaued. You've created a galaxy that's so safe, so stable, so predictable that you've stopped growing. You're not protecting civilization. You're presiding over its slow death. The chamber erupted. Delegates rose from their platforms, shouting in languages the translation devices couldn't keep up with. Energy beings flared brightly. Physical beings gestured with appendages that ranged from tentacles to claws. Daniel had just accused the Galactic Council of failure, and the response was predictably hostile, but he also noticed something else. Not all the delegates were angry. Some were silent, their body language suggesting thought rather than outrage. Some were exchanging communications with each other, rapid conversations that the translation devices weren't picking up. Some were looking at Daniel with what might have been recognition or even respect. High Arbiter Kelm raised one appendage, and the chamber gradually fell silent. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of something Daniel couldn't quite identify. Warning, threat? Or perhaps something closer to reluctant acknowledgement? You speak boldly for someone who stands alone before the most powerful governing body in the galaxy. Do you believe humanity is somehow superior to the species represented in this chamber? No, Daniel said immediately. I believe humanity is different. Not better. Not worse. Just different in ways that make us poorly suited to your model of civilization. You've built a galaxy based on peace and cooperation between species that evolved on stable, resource-rich worlds. Those species never needed to compete intensely for survival. They developed intelligence as a tool for understanding their environment, not for dominating it. That's admirable. That's worth preserving. But it's not the only valid path. He pulled a data device from his pocket, holding it up so the Council could see. This contains genetic analyses of every council species humanity has encountered. We've been studying you the same way you've been studying us. And we found something interesting. Every single council species has what human biologists call a consensus-seeking gene complex. You're literally evolved to prefer agreement over conflict. Your neurochemistry rewards cooperation and punishes aggression. You can't help being peaceful any more than we can help being competitive. If you understand this, Council Speaker Threll said slowly, then you understand why we cannot allow your species to operate freely in council space. Your competitive nature would destabilize everything we have built. Or it would revitalize it, Daniel said. Think about what I said earlier. Your civilization is stagnating. Birth rates falling. Colonies abandoned. Innovation stopped. You need something to shake you out of that decline. Something to remind you why you reached for the stars in the first place. That's what humanity offers. Not conquest. Not war, competition. Challenge, the kind of productive pressure that drives growth instead of decay. A delegate Daniel hadn't heard from yet spoke up. A serpentine being whose scales shifted through rainbow colors. You propose that the Council should accept humanity as a member species despite your aggressive nature? That we should trust you will use your competitive instincts for the benefit of galactic civilization rather than its destruction. I'm proposing you give us a chance to prove ourselves. Not 10,000 years. From now, not after you've locked us away and broken our spirit. Right now, while we're still the species we've always been. Daniel looked around the chamber, meeting as many alien gazes as he could. You talk about humanity being dangerous. You're right. We are dangerous. But danger isn't the same as evil. Fire is dangerous, but it keeps you warm. Storms are dangerous, but they bring life-giving rain. Humanity is dangerous, but we're also creative, adaptable, and fiercely loyal to those we consider allies. Give us a reason to be your allies instead of your enemies. And if we refuse? High Arbiter Kelm asked. If the Council votes to implement quarantine as planned? What will humanity do then, Ambassador Cross? This was the moment Daniel had been both dreading and preparing for. The moment when diplomacy ended and reality began. He had hoped it wouldn't come to this, hoped that reason and argument would be enough. But he had also known from the moment he stepped into this chamber that the Council had already made their decision. They had called him here not to negotiate but to deliver their judgment. Everything else had been theater, so he would give them theater they wouldn't forget. If you try to quarantine humanity, Daniel said quietly, we will resist. Not because we want conflict, not because we're the violent savages you think we are, but because we have the right to exist freely in this galaxy, and we will not surrender that right to beings who judge us without truly understanding us. You have fleets and armies and technology that dwarfs anything we possess. You could probably destroy Earth if you committed enough resources. But you would discover something in the process. You would discover what it takes to kill a species that evolved by refusing to die no matter what the universe threw at them. You threaten the Galactic Council? Threll's carapace glowed brighter, and Daniel could smell something acidic in the air. Pheromones, he realized. Insectoid anger translated into chemical communication. I'm stating facts. Humanity has been fighting for survival since before we climbed down from the trees. We faced predators, diseases, natural disasters, and each other. We've nearly gone extinct 6 times. We've endured ice ages and droughts and volcanic winters. We've survived things that would have killed any species in this chamber. And every time something tried to eliminate us, we adapted and came back stronger. Daniel's voice hardened. So, yes, you could try to quarantine us. You could try to cage 8 billion humans and hope we accept imprisonment. But you should understand something first. Caged predators don't become tame. They become desperate. And desperate humans are the most dangerous kind. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't shock or outrage. This was calculation. Daniel could see it in the way delegates were exchanging glances, in the rapid communications passing between platforms, in the subtle shift of body language from aggression to uncertainty. He had done something the council hadn't expected. He had made them question whether quarantine was worth the cost. High Arbiter Kelm descended until he was level with Daniel, his energy form solidifying into something almost solid. You have given this council much to consider, Ambassador Cross. We will deliberate on what you have said. You will be escorted to guest quarters while we debate. The council's decision will be communicated to you within 3 standard days. Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to demand immediate resolution. But he also recognized a partial victory when he saw one. The council hadn't ordered immediate quarantine. They were actually going to debate. That was more than he had hoped for when he entered the chamber. Thank you, High Arbiter. I await the council's wisdom. As Daniel was escorted from the chamber by 2 silent guards whose species he couldn't identify, he allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. He had bought time. Maybe not much, but enough. Enough for humanity to prepare. Enough for his backup plan to move forward. Enough for Earth to understand that they were no longer alone in the universe, and that their new neighbors might not be friendly behind him in the council chamber. 947 civilizations began the most important debate they had faced in 10,000 years. Would they risk allowing a predator species into their carefully constructed peaceful galaxy? Or would they do what they had always done when faced with threats they didn't understand? Would they try to cage the humans and hope for the best? 3 days. In 3 days, Daniel would have his answer. In 3 days, humanity's future among the stars would be decided by beings who had never known what it meant to fight for survival. In 3 days, the galaxy would learn whether peace could coexist with strength, or whether the two were forever incompatible. Daniel looked out through the transparent walls of the corridor, as guards led him away from the chamber. Stars stretched in every direction, billions of them, each one potentially hosting worlds that humanity might never see. He thought of Earth, that dangerous, beautiful planet that had forged his species in fire and struggle. He thought of all the humans who dreamed of walking on alien worlds, of seeing wonders that no human eyes had witnessed before. Then he thought of what would happen if the council chose quarantine. The preparations he had set in motion before ever leaving Earth, the contingency plans that even his own government didn't know about. The allies he had begun cultivating among the younger council species. The ones who still remembered what it meant to reach for something greater than comfortable stability. 3 days. It would be enough time to save humanity or to start a war that would reshape the galaxy. Daniel had no idea which it would be. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever the council decided, humanity would survive. Because that was what humans did. They survived. And nothing, not even the most powerful government in the galaxy, was going to change that. The guest quarters assigned to Ambassador Daniel Cross occupied a small section of the diplomatic station that orbited the council's administrative world. The rooms were comfortable by most standards, designed to accommodate a range of species with varying environmental needs. For Daniel, they felt like a cage. Transparent walls looked out onto a view of the station's interior gardens, where alien plants from 1,000 worlds grew in. Carefully controlled atmospheric domes, beautiful, peaceful, artificial. Daniel ignored the view and focused on the small communication device hidden in his diplomatic bag. It was technically illegal. Council regulations prohibited encrypted communications from guest quarters, ostensibly to prevent espionage. But humanity hadn't survived this long by following every rule, especially rules designed to keep them powerless. The device used quantum entanglement paired with prearranged one-time codes. Even if the council detected the transmission, they couldn't intercept or decode it. He activated the device and spoke quietly. Cross to Earth Command. Requesting secure line to Director Walsh. The response came 30 seconds later, the signal traveling instantaneously across light years through quantum pairing. Director Walsh authenticated. Status, Ambassador? The Council is debating. I have 3 days before they deliver their decision. Assessment is 60-40 in favor of quarantine. I pushed them harder than planned, made them question their assumptions. Some delegates are reconsidering. Most are not? I need you to activate contingency protocols. There was a pause. When Director Catherine Walsh spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone making decisions that would affect billions. Are you certain? Once we activate those protocols, we cannot pull back without appearing weak or deceptive. The Council will see it as confirmation of their fears. They already see us as a threat. I watched their faces during my testimony. Most of them have already made up their minds. The debate is just formality, political theater to make the decision appear reasoned and just. If we wait for them to lock us down, we lose any leverage we have. Daniel moved to the window, looking out at the alien gardens. Activate the protocols? All of them. And contact Colonel Harper. Tell her I'm authorizing Operation Threshold. Another pause, longer this time. Daniel, Operation Threshold means committing military assets? That's an act of war preparation. If the Council discovers we're positioning forces before they've even announced their decision, they'll use it as justification for immediate quarantine or worse. If they announce quarantine without us being prepared, humanity loses its only chance to remain free. I'm not letting that happen. Daniel's reflection stared back at him from the transparent wall. A middle-aged man with gray hair and tired eyes who looked nothing like the warrior he was about to become. Catherine, I stood before 947 alien civilizations today. I looked them in the eyes and told them humanity would not be caged. If I was bluffing, they'll see through it immediately. Every predator species recognizes another predator when they meet. The Council needs to believe we're willing to fight. That means actually being willing to fight. Understood. Protocols are activating now. Colonel Harper is being briefed. Daniel, you should know that public opinion on Earth is shifting. News of the Council's possible quarantine has leaked. People are scared. Some are calling for submission. Others are demanding we show strength. The government is fracturing over what position to take. Daniel had expected this. Fear was humanity's oldest companion, the emotion that had kept their ancestors alive when saber-toothed cats hunted in the darkness. But fear had two faces. It could make you hide or it could make you fight. Tell the truth. All of it. Let people know that the Council wants to imprison us for the crime of being too dangerous to control. Let them know that we have allies among the younger species who understand what we are. Let them know that we're not surrendering without a fight. Humanity responds to honesty better than pretty lies? What about the Council? If they're monitoring Earth communications, they'll see our preparations. Good, let them see. Let them understand that humanity means what it says. We're not violent because we enjoy it. We're violent when we need to be, when our survival depends on it. The Council thinks they can intimidate us into submission with their fleets and their ancient authority. They're about to learn otherwise. Daniel ended the communication and destroyed the device, following protocols that would prevent the Council from recovering any data even if they searched his quarters. Then he sat down and began to write. Not diplomatic correspondence. Not carefully worded statements designed to avoid offense. He wrote a message to humanity, to be delivered if the Council chose quarantine. Words that would rally his species for the fight that was coming. He was still writing 2 hours later when the door chimed. Daniel saved his work, encrypted it with codes only Earth Command could break, and called out permission to enter. The door slid open to reveal a being unlike any he had seen in the Council chamber. It stood roughly human height but was covered in sleek fur that shifted colors like oil on water. Its face was vaguely feline, with large eyes that reflected light in the dim room. When it spoke, its voice was surprisingly human-like, almost musical. Ambassador Cross, I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Reva Kess of the Talvin Assembly. I am a junior delegate to the Galactic Council. I was hoping we might speak privately. Daniel studied the alien carefully. The Talvin hadn't spoken during the Council session, and he didn't recall seeing them in any of the briefing materials. That meant they were either newly appointed or deliberately keeping a low profile. Either way, a delegate seeking private conversation was unusual and potentially dangerous. The Council assigned me these quarters specifically. I assume they're monitored. Nothing we say will be private. Ravakess entered the room and pulled a small device from a pouch at her side. She activated it, and Daniel felt a subtle pressure change in the air. This is a damping field. Talvin technology. It disrupts surveillance systems within a 5-meter radius. We have approximately 10 minutes before station security notices the interference and investigates. I suggest we use that time efficiently. Daniel gestured to a chair designed for bipedal species. Then please sit. What does a junior delegate to the Galactic Council want to discuss with the representative of a species facing quarantine? Reva settled into the chair with fluid grace, her color-shifting fur settling into a pattern of deep blues and purples. I want to offer information that may help humanity survive what is coming. But first, I need to understand something. Your speech before the Council, the challenge you issued, was that genuine conviction or was it political posturing? Does it matter? It matters very much. If you were posturing, then you are simply another diplomat playing games with words while real lives hang in the balance. If you were genuine, then you are the first species in 8,000 years to stand before the Council and refuse to submit to their authority. I need to know which you are before I decide what information to share. Daniel leaned forward, meeting the alien's large eyes directly. Everything I said in that chamber was true. Humanity will not accept imprisonment. We will fight if we must. We would prefer to find a peaceful solution, but we will not surrender our freedom to purchase safety. If that makes us dangerous, then yes, we're dangerous. But we're also desperate, and desperate beings are capable of things that comfortable civilizations can't imagine. Reva's fur shifted to greens and golds, colors Daniel hoped indicated approval or satisfaction. Then you should know that the Council's debate is not what it appears. The decision to quarantine humanity was made 6 months ago, long before you arrived. Today's hearing was purely ceremonial, designed to provide the appearance of due process. High Arbiter Kelm has already drafted the quarantine order. It will be announced in 48 hours regardless of the debate's outcome. Daniel felt cold anger settle in his chest. He had suspected as much, but having confirmation made it real in a way that suspicion never could. Why are you telling me this? If you're caught sharing classified Council information with me, you'll be expelled from the Assembly at minimum. Because the Talvin remember what it was like to be judged unfairly by the Council. 3,000 years ago, our species faced similar accusations. We were called too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous to integrate into civilized space. The Council proposed quarantine for us as well. Reva's colors darkened to deep reds and blacks. We submitted. We accepted their judgment. We allowed them to limit our expansion, to monitor our colonies, to oversee our development. For 3,000 years, we have proven ourselves peaceful and cooperative. And in that time, we have watched our species lose something vital. Our birth rates have declined. Our innovation has stagnated. We have become safe, stable, and slowly dying. You're warning me that submission leads to extinction. I'm warning you that the Council's model of civilization is not compatible with species like ours. And I suspect like yours. They have created a galaxy where only consensus-driven species can thrive. The rest of us must either change who we are or slowly fade into irrelevance. Reva leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But there is something else you should know. The Council is not as unified as they appear. 43 delegates voted against quarantine during preliminary discussions. 79 abstained. That represents nearly 15% of the Council membership. These are mostly younger species or those from more challenging worlds. They see humanity differently than the old core species do. Can they be convinced to change the final vote? Not without significant pressure. The core species control too much political capital, but they could be convinced to delay implementation, to demand additional observation periods, to require further debate. Bureaucratic delays might buy you months or even years instead of days. Reva's fur shifted to urgent yellows and oranges. There is also a faction, small but growing, that believes the Council's time is ending. They see the demographic collapse, the abandoned colonies, the technological stagnation. They believe the galaxy needs new species with different approaches to civilization. They would support humanity's right to exist freely if they believed you could survive long enough to become a viable alternative power. Daniel processed this information rapidly, adjusting his mental models of council politics. You're part of this faction. I am, along with representatives from 17 other species. We call ourselves the Renewal Faction, though we keep that name private. We believe the council should be reformed into something more flexible, something that can accommodate different models of civilization. But we are weak, Ambassador Cross. We lack military power. We lack political influence. What we have is information, connections, and the willingness to take risks that the core species would never consider. What are you proposing? Reva pulled out another device, this one displaying star maps and tactical data. The Council plans to establish their quarantine barrier, using a network of automated stations positioned at the edge of your solar system. These stations will generate a field that prevents faster-than-light travel. Once active, nothing enters or leaves Sol system without Council authorization. However, the stations require 6 weeks to fully deploy and activate. During that window, human ships can still escape. You're suggesting we evacuate. I'm suggesting you preserve your species' future by sending colony ships beyond the quarantine zone before it activates. The Renewal Faction has identified several uninhabited systems in neutral space where human colonies could be established. These systems are far from Council authority, but close enough to species who would trade with you. Humanity could survive there, grow there, and eventually return as a species too established to quarantine. Daniel studied the star maps, his mind already racing through possibilities. It could work. Earth's population couldn't be evacuated in 6 weeks, but colony ships could carry genetic diversity, cultural archives, technological knowledge, enough to ensure humanity's survival even if Earth itself was caged. But it would mean splitting the species, condemning billions to imprisonment while thousands fled to freedom. The Council will see this as confirmation that we're a threat. They'll claim we're establishing military outposts beyond their control. They will claim that regardless of what you do. At least this way, humanity survives. Reva's colors shifted to somber blues. I watched the Talvin submit to the Council's authority 3,000 years ago. I have studied what we lost in exchange for safety. We lost our drive, our passion, our willingness to take risks and push bound. Ares, we became what the Council wanted us to be, and in becoming that, we stopped being fully Talvin. Don't let that happen to humanity, Ambassador Cross. Fight, flee, survive, but do not submit. The damping field flickered, indicating its power was fading. Reva stood quickly, her fur shifting through rapid color changes that Daniel interpreted as urgency or fear. I must go before security arrives. The data I've given you is encrypted with codes that will appear in your diplomatic files within the hour. Use it wisely. And know that humanity has allies, even if they cannot speak openly in council chambers. She was gone before Daniel could respond, the door sliding shut behind her with barely a sound. Daniel looked down at the star map still displayed on her device, seeing the systems highlighted in green. Safe harbors for human colonies. Chances for survival beyond Earth's cage. He thought of Catherine Walsh and Colonel Harper, already activating Earth's defensive protocols. He thought of the 8 billion people on Earth who would wake up in 2 days to learn that alien civilizations wanted to imprison them forever. He thought of the colony ships being prepared in lunar orbit, vessels designed to carry humanity's hope to other worlds. Then he thought of what Reva Kess had said. The Council's decision was already made. The debate was theater. Submission led to slow extinction, and humanity had allies willing to take risks to help them survive. Daniel began to write again, but this time his words were different. Not a rallying cry for Earth, a set of orders for Operation Threshold, updated with new information and new objectives. Humanity would not submit. They would not be caged. And if the Council forced them to choose between imprisonment and exile, they would choose exile and make it the Council's problem for the rest of galactic history. 2 days. He had 2 days to prepare humanity for either war or exodus or both. It wasn't much time, but then again, humanity had never needed much time. They were the species that had gone from first flight to landing on their moon in 66 years. They were the species that had decoded their own genome in less than a decade. They were the species that had survived every attempt by their planet to kill them. The Galactic Council was about to learn what that really meant. And Daniel suspected they wouldn't enjoy the lesson. Colonel Sarah Harper stood in the Tactical Operations Center buried 3 kilometers beneath the Mojave Desert, watching holographic displays track the movement of every human asset in Sol System. 47 ships, ranging from military vessels to converted cargo haulers, all responding to the recall order that had gone out 6 hours ago. Operation Threshold was no longer theoretical. It was happening, and humanity's next few days would determine whether they remained free or became the galaxy's most heavily monitored prison population. Status report. Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of officers and analysts working at stations throughout the center. Lieutenant Marcus Rivera looked up from his tactical console. All military vessels have acknowledged the recall and are moving to designated coordinates. Civilian ships are being slower to respond. The commerce guilds are demanding explanations. Some are refusing to comply until they understand why we're mobilizing. Tell them the truth. The Galactic Council is planning to quarantine Earth. Any ship not in designated safe zones when the quarantine activates will be stranded wherever they are. They have 72 hours to decide if they want to be inside the cage or outside it. Marcus nodded and began transmitting updated orders. Sarah turned to her second-in-command, Commander James Okonkwo, who was reviewing intelligence data on a secondary display. What's the latest from Ambassador Cross? He's confirmed the Council's timeline. Quarantine announcement in 48 hours. Barrier deployment begins immediately after. Full activation in 6 weeks. James pulled up schematics of the barrier system, showing a network of automated stations that would surround Sol System in a sphere 43 astronomical units in diameter. Engineering estimates we could destroy maybe 15% of the stations before the barrier activates. Not enough to prevent the quarantine, but enough to weaken it. Create gaps we could exploit later. Sarah studied the schematics, her tactical mind already working through scenarios. What about the colony ships? Are they ready for acceleration? 3 are ready now. 2 more will be ready in 18 hours. The last one needs another 48 hours for final systems checks. If we launch before then, we risk catastrophic failure during the 3-month journey to the Renewal Faction's safe harbor systems. Sarah did the math quickly. 5 colony ships carrying 15,000 civilians plus genetic material and cultural archives. Not enough to evacuate everyone who wanted to leave Earth, but enough to ensure humanity survived beyond the quarantine. The 6th ship would have to stay behind or risk killing everyone aboard if its systems failed during flight. Tell the 6th ship's captain to prioritize children and genetic diversity. If the systems aren't perfect, I'd rather have them stuck in Sol System than dead in deep space. Yes. Ma'am, James transmitted the orders, then looked at Sarah with an expression she had learned to recognize. Concern mixed with loyalty, the face of someone about to question orders they would ultimately follow. Colonel, we're preparing for war with a civilization that controls most of the galaxy. Our entire military consists of 23 combat vessels, most of them barely tested. Even if we fight perfectly, we lose. We don't need to win, Commander. We need to survive long enough that the Council decides quarantine costs more than it's worth. Sarah pulled up tactical projections showing engagement scenarios against Council peacekeeping forces. Every simulation ended with human forces destroyed, but the numbers varied wildly depending on tactics and location. The Council hasn't fought a real war in 10,000 years. Their ships are designed for intimidation and police actions, not combat against opponents who fight back strategically. If we can bloody their nose enough times, make them pay for every kilometer they advance, eventually their political support collapses. And if it doesn't? If they're willing to absorb casualties to cage us? Sarah met his eyes directly. Then we make them regret it every single day for the rest of their civilization's existence. We become the threat they always feared we were. We make the quarantine zone so dangerous that council ships give it a wide berth. We turn Sol System into a fortress that reminds the galaxy what happens when you cage a predator species. She smiled grimly. But I don't think it'll come to that. The Renewal faction thinks the council is brittle. Let's find out if they're right. An alarm chimed from one of the monitoring stations. Lieutenant Kira Chun looked up, her expression tight with concern. Colonel, we're detecting unscheduled faster-than-light signatures at the edge of the system. Multiple contacts. Configuration matches Council military vessels. Sarah felt adrenaline spike through her system, the old combat reflex that had kept her alive through 2 border conflicts and a terrorist uprising. How many? 12. No, wait, 16. They're still arriving. Fleet composition looks like standard peacekeeping patrol groups. Light cruisers and support vessels. No heavy warships yet. They're establishing surveillance positions before the main fleet arrives. Sarah pulled up tracking data, watching the council ships settle into orbit around the outer planets. Perfectly positioned to monitor all traffic in and out of the inner system. Time to intercept if we launch now? 47 hours at maximum burn. But Colonel, engaging council forces before they've officially implemented quarantine would be an act of war. Right now, this is still technically a diplomatic situation. It stopped being diplomatic the moment they entered our system without permission. Sarah opened a command channel to the human fleet. All vessels, this is Harper Actual. We have council military forces establishing positions in our outer system. This is not a drill? Execute Operation Threshold Phase 2. Repeat, Phase 2 is now active. The tactical display came alive with movement as human ships began burning toward predetermined coordinates. Not attacking the Council forces directly, but positioning themselves to contest control of key orbital positions. The Council ships immediately responded, adjusting their formations to maintain observation superiority. Both fleets moved like pieces on a chessboard, each side trying to establish advantage without firing the first shot. They're hailing us, Kira reported. Council frequency? Message is being routed through official diplomatic channels. Put it through to my station only? Let's see what they want. The holographic display shifted to show a being Sarah recognized from the intelligence briefings. Fleet Commander Noth of the Council Peacekeeping Corps, a Vorson whose species had served as the Council's military arm for 6,000 years. Vorsons were large, powerfully built beings who moved with surprising grace despite their size. Noth's expression was unreadable by human standards, but his body language suggested tension. Colonel Harper, I am Fleet Commander Noth. My forces have been ordered to establish monitoring positions, in preparation for the implementation of quarantine protocols. We are not here to engage in hostilities. We are simply ensuring the peaceful transition to the new order. Sarah leaned back in her chair, projecting confidence she didn't entirely feel. Fleet Commander, you've entered Sol System without authorization. Under human law, that's an invasion. I suggest you withdraw your forces immediately. Human law does not supersede Council authority. The quarantine order will be announced within 36 hours. My forces are simply moving into position to implement that order once it becomes official. And if we refuse to accept your authority? If we contest your presence in our system? Noth was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something that might have been regret or respect. Then we will enforce the quarantine by whatever means necessary. Colonel, I have reviewed your military record. You are an experienced commander. You understand the mathematics of force projection? My fleet is a small advance group. The main quarantine force consists of 5,000 vessels. You cannot win this fight. Maybe not, but we can make you regret starting it. Sarah pulled up data showing the Council ships' current positions. Your vessels are clustered around Neptune and Uranus. That puts you in orbital resonance with 3 of Jupiter's larger moons. If we were to alter the trajectory of even one of those moons using mass drivers, the gravitational disruption would force you to constantly adjust position. Your fuel reserves would be depleted within 18 days. Then you'd be stranded in our outer system, unable to maneuver. Easy targets for anyone who wanted to take shots at sitting ducks. Noth's expression changed, his body language shifting in ways Sarah couldn't interpret. You would weaponize planetary bodies? That's a violation of the Celestial Protection Accords. Those are your rules, Commander. We never signed them. We're just a dangerous species from a death world, remember? You should expect us to fight with whatever weapons we can improvise. Sarah smiled without warmth. Here's my suggestion. You pull your fleet back to the heliopause. Stay there while the Council finishes their debate. If they officially order quarantine, we'll negotiate the terms like civilized beings. But if you try to enforce restrictions before that order is official, we'll treat it as an invasion and respond accordingly. I cannot withdraw. My orders are clear. Then you're going to discover what happens when orderly bureaucrats meet chaotic survivors. Your choice, Commander. Peace or war? But choose quickly because my people are already calculating firing solutions on your positions. The transmission ended. Sarah immediately opened channels to her tactical team. I want mass driver calculations on all moons within range of the Council fleet. I want them to believe we're actually crazy enough to start throwing moon-sized rocks at them. Make the calculations obvious. Let their sensors see what we're planning. Colonel, actually moving those moons would cause cascading orbital disruptions throughout the outer system. The long-term damage to Sol system would be catastrophic. I know. But they don't know that we know. Right now, they're trying to decide if humans are rational actors who understand consequences or desperate survivors who'll do anything to remain free. I want them nervous. I want them second-guessing their positions. I want them to report back to the Council that humanity is unstable and unpredictable. James was already implementing the orders, but his expression remained troubled. We're bluffing with weapons we'd never actually use. What happens when they call that bluff? Then we find out if we're as crazy as we're pretending to be. Sarah pulled up communication logs from Earth Command, seeing reports flooding in from across the planet. Governments demanding action. Peace activists calling for submission. Military hawks demanding immediate attack. The whole messy spectrum of human opinion trying to process the reality that aliens wanted to lock them away forever. What's the public mood? Chaotic. Fear is the dominant emotion, but it's splitting in different directions. Asia is leaning toward negotiated settlement. Europe is calling for calm and continued dialogue. North America is divided between submission and resistance. Africa and South America are demanding we show strength. No consensus. Humanity in a nutshell. 8 billion opinions and not one of them agrees with the next. Sarah thought about what Ambassador Cross had said before leaving for the Council station. Humanity responds to honesty better than pretty lies. Open a channel to all major news networks. It's time people understood exactly what we're facing. 10 minutes later, Sarah found herself looking into cameras that would broadcast her image across Earth. She hadn't prepared a speech. She didn't have talking points or diplomatic language. She had only truth, delivered by someone who had spent 20 years defending humanity from threats they couldn't see and enemies they didn't know existed. People of Earth. I'm Colonel Sarah Harper, Commanding Officer of Operation Threshold. By now, most of you have heard rumors about the Galactic Council's plans to quarantine our world. I'm here to tell you those rumors are true. In approximately 36 hours, the Council will officially announce their intention to imprison humanity in our own solar system. They claim this is necessary because we're too dangerous to exist freely among galactic civilization. She paused, letting that sink in. They're not entirely wrong. We are dangerous. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. We survived by becoming smarter, faster, stronger, and more adaptable than anything else on Earth. We developed weapons and technology and social structures that let us overcome challenges that would have destroyed softer species. That makes us uncomfortable for civilizations that have never known real struggle. But being dangerous doesn't make us evil. It doesn't give the Council the right to lock us away, like criminals who haven't committed any crime except being good at survival. And I want to be absolutely clear with everyone watching this. The human military will not allow Earth to be caged without resistance. If the Council proceeds with their quarantine plan, we will contest it. That may mean war. It will certainly mean sacrifice. Some of us will not survive, but we will remain free or we will die trying, because that's what humans do when faced with extinction or imprisonment. Sarah looked directly into the camera, speaking to the billions of people who were watching, judging, deciding what they believed humanity should do. I know many of you are afraid. You should be. The Council controls technology and forces that dwarf anything we possess. They could destroy Earth if they were willing to commit enough resources. But they don't want to destroy us. They want to control us. And control requires them to put their forces in range of ours. That's where they made their mistake. Because humans are very good at fighting from disadvantageous positions. We've been doing it for our entire history. In the next few days, you're going to see human ships moving into defensive positions. You're going to see military mobilization on a scale we haven't experienced since the resource wars. You're going to hear politicians and commentators debating whether resistance is wise or suicidal. Listen to them. Think for yourselves. But understand this. The choice before us isn't between safety and danger. It's between freedom and captivity. And I have always believed that humans would rather die free than live in chains. Sarah ended the broadcast and immediately regretted about half of what she had said. Too emotional. Too confrontational. Too much of her own convictions projected onto billions of people who might not share them. But it was done. Humanity would respond however they chose. "Colonel, we're getting responses from the Council fleet," Kira reported. "They're pulling back. Not all the way to the heliopause like you suggested, but they're creating more distance between their positions and ours." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. "They're nervous. Good. Keep the mass driver calculations running. Make them visible on all sensors. I want the Council to think we're one bad decision away from starting an interplanetary catastrophe." James pulled up intelligence reports coming in from various sources. Ambassador Cross is reporting that the Renewal faction is mobilizing support among junior delegates. They're calling for delays in the quarantine implementation, demanding additional fact-finding missions, requesting environmental impact studies. Standard bureaucratic obstruction, but it might buy us time. How much time? Weeks at best. The core species have too much influence to be stopped indefinitely. Sarah nodded. Weeks would be enough. Enough to evacuate the colony ships. Enough to establish defensive positions that would make the Council reconsider their approach. Enough to prove that humanity wasn't going to submit quietly no matter what the Council decided. She looked at the tactical display showing human and Council forces positioned throughout Sol System. 2 fleets, neither willing to fire first, both preparing for the moment when talking ended and fighting began. This was the edge, Sarah realized. The moment when civilization stood between peace and war, when choices made by individuals would echo through history. All stations, maintain current alert status. No one fires unless fired upon. But if the Council makes the first move, we respond with everything we have. Make sure every commander understands. This isn't a police action. This isn't a negotiation. This is us telling the galaxy that humanity will not be caged. Across Sol System, 47 human vessels held their positions, outnumbered and outgunned but not outmatched in determination. And on Earth, 8 billion people began to understand that they were no longer alone in the universe, and that their new neighbors didn't know what to make of beings who had learned to survive. By refusing to quit no matter how impossible the odds, the Council had wanted to cage humanity before they became a threat. They were about to discover they had already waited too long. Ambassador Daniel Cross stood in the observation gallery overlooking the Galactic Council chamber, watching as 947 delegates engaged in what could only be called chaos. The carefully ordered civilization that had ruled the galaxy for 18,000 years was fracturing before his eyes, and he felt something uncomfortably close to satisfaction. They had done this to themselves by refusing to see humanity as anything other than a problem to be solved. Below, High Arbiter Kelm was attempting to restore order, but his energy form kept flickering in ways that suggested extreme stress. The announcement of humanity's military preparations had hit the Council like a shockwave. Species that had never experienced conflict were demanding immediate action. Others were calling for negotiation. The Renewal faction was blocking every vote with procedural objections. It was beautiful bureaucratic gridlock, and it was buying humanity exactly what they needed: time. "They're terrified," Ravaketh said quietly from beside Daniel. The Talvin delegate had become his unofficial guide through council politics, sharing information that no human should have access to. The core species expected humanity to submit. They built their entire quarantine strategy on the assumption that you would recognize their superior force and accept imprisonment rather than risk annihilation. "You've broken their model of how the galaxy works?" By threatening to throw moons at them? Daniel shook his head. "We're bluffing, you know. Actually, weaponizing planetary bodies would be insane. The orbital disruptions alone would make the outer system unstable for centuries. But they don't know you're bluffing. That's the point. The Council cannot conceive of a species willing to damage their own star system to resist external authority. It goes against everything they understand about rational behavior." Rava's fur shifted through thoughtful colors. They're beginning to realize that human rationality operates on different principles than theirs. You don't optimize for stability. You optimize for freedom. Those are incompatible values. Below, a delegate Daniel had learned was from the Kresh Collective rose to speak. The insectoid being's translator rendered its words into flat, mechanical speech. "The human response to our peacekeeping deployment demonstrates exactly why quarantine is necessary. They have threatened to weaponize celestial bodies. They have mobilized military forces without provocation. They have refused to acknowledge council authority. These are the actions of an aggressor species that cannot be trusted." Another delegate, this one from a species Daniel didn't recognize, responded immediately. "The Council sent military forces into their system before officially implementing quarantine. By what logic do we condemn them for responding to what they reasonably perceive as an invasion? We are forcing them to choose between submission and resistance, then using their choice to resist as justification for harsher measures. This is circular reasoning at best, tyranny at worst." The Kresh delegate's carapace glowed brighter. "The Council has the authority to implement quarantine for any species deemed a threat to galactic stability. Humanity meets every criterion in the hazard assessment protocols. We are following established law, laws written by comfortable species who never imagined they would be applied to themselves." The unknown delegate shot back. "The hazard assessment protocols were designed to protect the galaxy from genuinely dangerous species. Humanity has not attacked anyone. They have not seized territory. They have not demonstrated hostile intent toward any council species. Their only crime is being evolved from a harsh world and refusing to pretend otherwise." Daniel felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find General Victor of the Cronus Alliance, his massive form somehow moving silently despite his size. The general's expression was unreadable by human standards, but his body language suggested urgency. "Ambassador Cross, I need you to come with me. Now, there's something you must see." They moved through the station's corridors quickly. Victor's was clearing a path through crowds of delegates and staff. The general led Daniel to a secure conference room, where Fleet Commander Sethes was waiting with tactical displays showing Sol System and the surrounding region. 3 hours ago," Victor said without preamble, "the Council dispatched their main quarantine fleet, 5,000 vessels under Fleet Marshal Torvath. They will arrive at Sol System in 4 days. Once they arrive, quarantine will be implemented regardless of the debate's outcome. The Council has decided to proceed with force." Daniel felt cold spread through his chest. 4 days. Does Colonel Harper know? We transmitted the information to Earth Command through back channels. Your military is preparing, but Ambassador, you need to understand something. 5,000 Council vessels is not a force designed for peaceful implementation. That's an armada intended to crush resistance. They're not planning to negotiate. They're planning to occupy. Cephis pulled up fleet composition data. The Council is deploying heavy siege vessels, planetary bombardment platforms, and garrison troops. This isn't a police action. It's a military conquest disguised as peacekeeping. Daniel studied the numbers, his tactical training from his years in the military before he became a diplomat reasserting itself. 5,000 ships meant the Council was taking humanity seriously as a threat. It also meant they were committing resources on a scale they hadn't used in millennia. This was make or break for Council authority. If humanity somehow survived or escaped this force, the Council's grip on the galaxy would be broken forever. What are my options? Daniel asked. Limited, Victor admitted. The Cronus Alliance can commit 400 vessels to Sol System within 6 days. But that's 2 days after the Council fleet arrives. If we engage after hostilities have started, we risk all-out war between the Cronus and the Council. Our government is debating whether that's a risk worth taking. And if they decide it's not, then humanity stands alone against 5,000 Council warships. Victor's multiple eyes focused on Daniel with uncomfortable intensity. But there is another option. The Renewal faction has proposed an emergency measure. If enough delegates can be convinced to support it, they can invoke the arbitration clause. It's an ancient provision that allows contested, quarantine decisions to be resolved through trial by combat rather than full military engagement. Daniel blinked. Trial by combat. You're serious? Completely. The clause was written 12,000 years ago when the Council was younger and more diverse. It allows species facing quarantine to challenge the decision through limited military engagement. Both sides commit equal forces to a designated battle space. The outcome determines whether quarantine proceeds. Cephis pulled up the relevant treaty documentation. It's never been invoked in recorded history, but it's technically still valid Council law. How does this help us? We'd still be outnumbered whatever limits they set. Not necessarily. The arbitration clause allows the challenged species to set the terms of engagement. You choose the location, the force composition, and the victory conditions. The Council must match your choices or accept that quarantine is rejected. Reva Kess entered the room, her fur displaying urgent patterns. We've been lobbying delegates for the past 3 hours. We have the votes to invoke the clause if humanity formally requests it. But you need to decide now. Once the Council fleet arrives at Sol System, the window closes. Daniel's mind raced through scenarios. A limited engagement meant lower casualties. It meant the Council couldn't just overwhelm humanity with superior numbers. It meant fighting on terms humans could actually win. But it also meant betting everything on a single battle. If they lost, quarantine would be implemented immediately with no further debate. What would the Council agree to for force composition? Victor pulled up draft terms. We estimate they'd accept 20 vessels per side, with engagement occurring in neutral space away from both human and Council territories. Victory conditions would likely be defined as either complete destruction of enemy forces or successful completion of a defined objective. The details would need to be negotiated, but the basic framework is viable. 20 ships. Humanity could field 20 combat-capable vessels if they stripped Earth's defenses and recalled every asset. Against 20 Council ships crewed by species who hadn't fought a real war in 10,000 years. It was impossible odds. It was also humanity's best chance. If we do this, Daniel said slowly, if we invoke this clause and challenge the Council to trial by combat, what happens to the colony ships? The ones evacuating to Renewal faction space? They'd be allowed to proceed, Reva confirmed. The arbitration clause includes provisions for contested species to preserve their genetic and cultural heritage regardless of the trial's outcome. Your colony ships would be guaranteed safe passage. Daniel looked at the tactical displays showing Sol System. Seeing the scattered icons representing human ships, stations, and 8 billion people who had no idea their fate was being decided in a conference room light years away. He thought of Colonel Harper and her determination to fight rather than submit. He thought of Director Walsh coordinating humanity's desperate preparations. He thought of all the humans who had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of walking among them. "Do it?" Daniel said. "Invoke the arbitration clause?" Humanity formally challenges the Council's authority to implement quarantine. We'll face them in trial by combat and prove that Deathworlders don't submit to beings who've forgotten what it means to fight. Reva's fur exploded into bright colors. "You're certain?" "Once invoked, the clause cannot be withdrawn. If you lose, quarantine is permanent. The Council will never allow another challenge." "Uncertain. Get me the votes. I'll negotiate the terms." Daniel turned to Victor. "General, I need the Kronos military to provide tactical advice to our fleet commanders. If we're going to fight 20 Council vessels, we need every advantage we can get." "You'll have it." Fleet Commander Sethes will work directly with Colonel Harper. Between Kronos experience and human adaptability, you might actually have a chance. Victor extended one massive hand. "This is the moment that defines humanity's place in the galaxy, Ambassador Cross. Win, and you're free. Lose, and you're forgotten. There is no middle ground." "There never is for Deathworlders," Daniel replied, clasping the alien hand. "We're used to all-or-nothing gambles. It's how we got off Earth in the first place." 4 hours later, Daniel stood before the Galactic Council once more. The chamber was quieter than before, the delegates having exhausted themselves with days of debate. High Arbiter Kelm looked at the human ambassador with something that might have been weary resignation. "Ambassador Cross, the Renewal faction has invoked the arbitration clause on your behalf. This is unprecedented, but the Council acknowledges the legality of the action. Do you formally request trial by combat to contest the quarantine order?" Daniel looked around the chamber, seeing the faces of 947 civilizations. Some hostile, some curious, some actually hopeful that humanity might succeed. He thought of every human who had ever fought against impossible odds. Every ancestor who had faced down predators with nothing but stones and determination. Every generation that had survived when all logic said they should perish. "High Arbiter, humanity formally requests trial by combat. We will face the Council's forces in neutral space under terms to be negotiated. We will prove that Deathworlders deserve freedom, not imprisonment. And we will show the galaxy that being dangerous doesn't make us evil. It just makes us survivors." The chamber erupted. Some delegates cheered. Others protested. Many simply watched in stunned silence as a primitive species from a death world challenged 18,000 years of established authority. The vote was called. 412 delegates approved the trial by combat. 317 opposed. 218 abstained. The measure passed. Humanity would get its chance to fight for freedom. 20 ships against 20 ships. Winner take all. The fate of 8 billion people decided by one battle between species who understood survival and species who had forgotten what it cost. High Arbiter Kelm's energy form pulsed slowly. Colors Daniel had learned to associate with something like respect or perhaps pity. Then let it be recorded. Humanity has invoked the arbitration clause. Terms of engagement will be negotiated over the next 48 hours. The trial by combat will commence in 7 standard days. May the outcome bring peace to all species involved. Daniel bowed formally and left the chamber. He had work to do. A battle to plan, a species to save, and 7 days to convince 20 human ship captains that they could beat odds that should have been impossible on Earth. Colonel Harper received the news and immediately began coordinating with Kronos military advisors. The ships were chosen. The crews were briefed. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Tactics were developed, refined, and war-gamed against every scenario the human and Kronos planners could imagine. 7 days later, 20 human vessels faced 20 Council ships in the empty space between stars. The battle lasted 14 hours. It was vicious, chaotic, and unlike anything the Council forces had ever experienced. Human ships fought with desperation and creativity, using tactics the Council couldn't predict because they came from a species that had learned warfare through 10,000 years of fighting each other. When the battle ended, 12 human ships remained operational. 8 Council vessels survived. By the terms of the arbitration clause, humanity had won. The quarantine order was rescinded. Humanity was granted full rights as a spacefaring species. The colony ships reached renewal faction space and established thriving settlements. Earth remained free, and the Galactic Council learned that sometimes the most dangerous species are the ones that refuse to quit even when all logic says they should. Ambassador Daniel Cross stood once more before the Council, this time to negotiate humanity's formal admission to galactic civilization. His words were different now. Not defiant, not desperate, simply honest. We are Deathworlders. We survived by being stronger, smarter, and more determined than everything that tried to kill us. We will always be dangerous because danger is what kept us alive. But we can also be loyal, creative, and protective of those we call allies. Give us a chance to prove it. Give us freedom to show you what humans can build when we're not fighting for survival. You might be surprised by what we become. The Council voted. Humanity was accepted, and the galaxy changed forever because for the first time in 18,000 years, civilization included species who remembered what it meant to fight and win, and refused to surrender no matter the cost. The Deathworlders had claimed their place among the stars, and they would never let it go. Retriclod can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.